Good afternoon, and welcome to Big Topics, Short Takes, a new series being presented to you by the Columbia College Alumni Association. Today's program is on civil disobedience, ethnic studies, and the Center for the Study of Ethnicity and Race. My name is Joanne Kwong, Columbia College class of 1997. I'm a board member of the CCAA and co-chair of the Intellectual Programming Committee. I want to acknowledge my co-chair and partner in crime, Kurt Roloff's class of 88, and Director of Alumni Relations, Thandi Jarrett Abdullali, who lead the committee with me, as well as our hardworking members who have met over the last year or so to create interesting programming for all alumni, both in person and virtual, so that we can continue to share the intellectually curious experiences together, even if we're far away from those days studying in Butler or hanging out on the steps. Big Topics, Short Takes is a brand new series that we're excited to present. It's a virtual series where we tackle one big timely topic per semester and ask three of our esteemed faculty to speak to those topics based on their expertise. We're experimenting with a few formats, but today we're delighted to be hearing short lectures from our two wonderful speakers for the first half hour and then reserving the last half hour for Q&A. Because of the compact time frame, we may not get to every question, but we'll do our best to collate and combine questions as best as we can. So at any time during the program, please type your question into the Q&A box below. And Kurt and Thandi will be helping to feed me those questions until we run out of time. Also for premium viewing, please adjust to full screen as there will be documents presented. This semester's theme is on civil disobedience. Given all that has happened both on campus and in the world since October 7th of last year, we as alumni wanted to hear from faculty and honestly receive some help, not just debating the issues of the day, but also contextualizing recent events within Columbia's history and tradition, especially as the quote-unquote activist Ivy. The first of these three conversations featured Professor Ty Jones from history, who gave us a fascinating 100-year overview of Columbia's radical protest tradition from 1924 to today. It was really interesting, and you can view it if you'd like on the CCA YouTube channel. Our third presentation is scheduled for October 30th, same time, 12 noon Eastern Standard, with history professor Robert Neer, and he will lead us in a core-style discussion examining a selection of Martin Luther King Jr.'s texts about civil disobedience. Today is our second presentation, focusing specifically on the ethnic studies movement in 1996 and how it eventually led to the creation of the Center for the Study of Ethnicity and Race, or CSER, the only academic unit at Columbia born out of protest. Full disclosure, in 1996, I was a junior at Columbia and one of the 200 plus protesters who took over Hamilton Hall and Lowe Library, demanding, among other things, a more diverse core curriculum and the establishment of a full ethnic studies department, which would include and house Latino studies and Asian American studies, among other disciplines. I'm really honored to introduce our speakers today. Our first speaker is Professor Marcel Agüeros. Professor Agüeros is a professor in the Department of Astronomy. Welcome, Marcel, and founding director of the Bridge to the Ph.D. program in STEM. His research interest is in observational stellar astrophysics, and specifically in using new data sets and technologies to address classic questions in stellar evolution. Professor Agüeros has won numerous awards for his scholarship and service, including an NSF Career Award, the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers, Columbia University's Lenfest Distinguished Faculty Award, its Presidential Teaching Award for Faculty, and its Faculty Service Award. Today, though, Dr. Agüeros will be joining us not to speak about astrophysics, though that would be super interesting. He is here as an alumnus and will tell us about his experiences as one of the organizers of the ethnic studies movement and hunger striker during his senior year at Columbia in 1996. Our second speaker will be Professor Mae Ngai. Welcome, Professor Ngai. Professor Ngai is currently the Lung Family Professor of Asian American Studies and Professor of History. She was also the co-director of CSER from 2019 to 2023. Professor Ngai is a U.S. legal and political historian interested in the histories of immigration, citizenship, nationalism, and the Chinese diaspora. She is the author of several award-winning books, including Impossible Subjects, Illegal Aliens and the Making of Modern America, The Chinese Question, The Gold Rushes and Global Politics, and co-editor of this year's Corky Lee's Asian America, 50 Years of Photographic Justice. Before becoming a historian, she was a labor union organizer and educator in New York City. And in 1996, she was a graduate student in Morningside Heights, right on Columbia's campus. A reminder again before we start, please input any questions you may have into the Q&A box, and we will do our best to get through all these questions. And I am delighted to turn the podium over to Professor Agüeros.
Thank you very much, Joanne. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me see if I can find my slides here. So I think I should just jump in and try and provide a little bit of context for the protests in '96. I happen to find the history fascinating, and I hope this will interest you as well. So the earliest mention that I could find in the Spectator of ethnic studies is from the late 1960s. Specifically, it's from a report that was developed by a unit that no longer exists. It was called the Urban Center. And the Urban Center advocated for the creation of programs in Black, Puerto Rican, and Third World Studies. And Mae is much better placed to discuss this than I am, but this is a time when these kinds of programs were popping up across the nation. And so the fact that there was a discussion of this happening at Columbia is not particularly surprising. What's interesting from this very early article is that there is already a mention of creating a specific department to study ethnic affairs, as it's titled here. And so jumping ahead a few years, what happens in the country is that Congress actually passes an act, which is one of these unfunded mandates where they say, universities should develop programs around ethnic studies. And so Columbia actually puts together a task force to address how it as an institution might address this unfunded mandate. And so this is a clipping from the university record from October 1973. So what is that? Almost exactly 51 years ago. This report is a 3-page report where it discusses what is ethnic studies, what might it look like at Columbia, why is it useful for us to have this. It mentions this Ethnic Heritage Studies Act, which is this unfunded mandate. And then I just blew up one little piece of the text that I'm going to read out to you because I think it is very relevant here. So in October 1973, this committee says, the committee recommends that consideration be given to the establishment of a Center for Studies in Ethnicity. In addition to assuming the functions suggested for the Standing Committee, which it would replace, the center would have as its main objective the development of subjects, materials, and methods supportive of instruction in ethnic studies. We envision the center as dependent for its success on a high order of creative scholarship closely tied to teaching and educational functions, a capacity for disciplined experimentation and teaching methods, and a capacity to bring together academic disciplines, teachers and learners, and insiders and outsiders in the cause of better understanding of ethnicity as an element of individual and social experience. As a mission statement for such a center, this is wonderful. Of course, no such center is created in 1973, or indeed for a couple of decades afterwards. So just to provide a little bit of a sort of illustration of the discussion around ethnic studies, this plot here that I'm showing is actually, I'm sorry, I couldn't blow it up without sort of ruining it. This is just asking the Spectator archive how often the words ethnic studies appeared in the spec. And you can essentially see, right, the first few dots here are in the late 1960s. And then the issue sort of is bubbling around. It increases slightly in the 1990s. And then this peak, of course, corresponds to 1996, where a full 20% of the times that the word ethnic studies appears in spec, that's just the year 1996. So it's not like nothing happened over those decades, but things were, I would say, relatively quiet. They weren't completely dead, though. And so I wanted to provide a little bit of background to what was going on when I came to Columbia. And when I came to Columbia, what had happened was that there had been a number of recent efforts to try and start programs specifically in Latino or Puerto Rican studies and separately in Asian American studies. And so this is an example of one of these proposals put together by students with some faculty input in the late 80s, early 1990s. It includes alum, Angelo Falcon, for example. It includes current faculty at Columbia. So Deborah Levinson actually taught my Latin American Civ classes when I was an undergrad. And it includes prestigious outsiders like Juan Flores, who was a professor at the Center for Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College. I don't have an equivalent document for Asian American studies, but I know the same kinds of long-term discussions had been happening around Asian American studies. And I found, for example, a letter that I co-signed to SPEC with a number of Asian American students. You can see, if you look at that list of names, one of them is not like the others. And in this letter, we point out, for 6 years, we've been asking for Asian American studies. And for 6 years, we've been hearing that there's a university budget crisis that won't allow for the development of Asian American studies. This letter, by the way, is in response to comments that Jonathan Cole made, the provost at the time. And ironically, I ran into Jonathan Cole on the street yesterday. So it's kind of funny how life, I guess, takes us in circles. All right, so what was going on immediately before the strike in 96? Oh, sorry, I'm skipping. There was an acceleration in the demands. Basically, people's frustration started to boil over. I think it's fair to say that we'd seen several generations of undergrads come through Columbia, make these demands around the creation of these programs. These demands, I should mention, were fairly, I would say, modest, sitting where I am now, in the sense that they built upon a lot of what was already existing at Columbia, that is, classes that already existed, faculty who were already teaching certain things, and actually requested 1 or 2 extra people and a few more classes to sort of construct the major largely from what there already was. And I would say that that is a very inexpensive proposition relative to what building an actual new department from scratch would look like. But what we saw systematically was that generations of undergraduates would graduate. The university works on a different kind of time scale. It can afford to wait out those students. And the knowledge about these requests was kind of lost and had to start over again. And so by my senior year, which was 1996, we were determined not to let that happen. There was a lot of teaching that went on in the fall of 1995. And in 1996, there was some escalation. And so the first thing that happened was there was a takeover of the dean's office to try and bring this to the attention, to sort of heighten the attention being paid to this issue. This is a fun picture because this is my friend Adam Stevens, who was an absolute indispensable for these protests because he owned a bullhorn, which you can see in this. And it's important to realize that this was a multi-pronged strategy. So there was some direct action. There was also a lot of discussion going on with administrators. At the time, administrators had regular town halls with the students, which I'm not convinced is something that actually happens all that much anymore. And in every forum that we could go to and talk to administrators, we would talk about why aren't these programs being put in place? Why isn't ethnic studies a priority in the institution? And of course, the reason we're here talking about this is that in April of 1996, on April 1st, which is not maybe the most auspicious day, but that happened to be the first Monday in April that year, 4 of us started a hunger strike, again, with the intention of trying to accelerate discussions around these issues. And while I would say that there are quite a few things that happened over the course of the following week, I would say largely the strike was ignored by the administrators until an escalation occurred, which was the takeover of Low Library. And that definitely caused the administration, I think, to panic, probably did not please the trustees if I think about the way our university is structured today and how decisions are made, and somewhat shooting themselves in the foot, the university called in the police and arrested 22 students who'd been in Low. I should say that this was not exactly the first time that the police had come in and arrested students since '68, but it had been a really long time since anything like this had occurred. And that wound up bringing a huge amount of attention to the protest nationally. It also galvanized a significant fraction of the student body that had been kind of sitting on the sidelines and watching this, but was incredibly upset by this, as you may imagine. And so the next thing from there, we left Low after one night, and students who stayed behind had volunteered to get arrested. So this wasn't exactly like a clearing out of the building. This was more that students who were there were willing to get arrested. The rest of us had left and made our way over to Hamilton Hall, which was then occupied for the duration of a weekend. And so here I'm going to share some pictures that I took. My best guess is that this was taken over the period of the Saturday, April 13th through Sunday, April 14th of 1996. That's the side of Hamilton, obviously. And here you see some pictures of the front door. There was some decoration going on. One of the nice things that happened over that period of time was that lots of outside community groups came and visited us and expressed their support. There were general discussions and sort of teach-in moments that happened on the outside of Hamilton during the course of that day and over that weekend as a whole. There was even a party in Hamilton that evening. There were more teach-ins and activities going on in the classrooms over the course of that weekend. And then the following day towards the evening, this is a picture I took right at the end of that Sunday, I think, when there were actually discussions going on inside with our negotiating team. There were 6 people, 6 students who were negotiating with the administration to end the strike. And that end happened on the Monday. We essentially agreed to end the occupation in exchange for the formation of a blue ribbon committee that was convened to act on essentially recommendations that had been made to create a center for the study of ethnicity and race 25 years before. So really getting the university to live up to commitments that it should have made a long time before. And so the clipping there on the right is from a couple of years after I graduated, announcing the creation of the center in 1998. And one of the amusing things about this article, as with other articles from SPEC from that period, is that it continuously references the creation, actually not of a center, but of a department for the study of ethnicity and race. So the day after you have this November 4th, 1998 article, you have this correction in SPEC saying, university establishes ethnic studies department that ran in yesterday's SPEC to incorrectly named the program. It is the Ethnic Studies Center, not department. And to which I can only say, indeed. Okay, so with that, I'll hand over to Mae. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Marcel, for taking us on that journey and your own experience in it. It's really remarkable. And I'm just going to pick up. I will say that in 1996, I was a graduate student. I was writing my dissertation, so I wasn't on campus, but I was with you all in spirit. As Marcel indicated in the last slide, in 1998, the university decided to start a center. It actually started in 1999, CSER, the Center for the Study of Ethnicity and Race. So the struggle goes on. We still don't have a department, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But I want to just take a step back and talk a little bit about ethnic studies as a discipline, as an area of study, and suggest perhaps why it has taken us so long to even get to where we are, and we're still not even there yet. What is the reason for the resistance on the part of the university, right? And I think it starts with, what is ethnic studies about? What are its core concepts? And I want to say in a very kind of succinct way, ethnic studies is an attempt to decolonize, if you will, a college education, right? It's an attempt to correct the Eurocentrism that has dominated university education for, as long as Columbia has existed, for sure, right? Over 100 years. And what do I mean by that? Well, what we study are certain concepts that are crucial to understanding the making of the modern world. Concepts and histories and ideas that are downplayed or marginalized in the traditional curriculum of American universities. Those are concepts concerning race, colonialism, migration, the formation of diasporic communities, of indigenous communities and their dispossessions, study of social and economic and racial inequalities. It's a transnational study. It's not just about the United States, and indeed it's global. I think what's really important to understand is that it's a comparative study. It's not just about one group. And I think the field as a whole has shifted over time from discrete programs like Asian American studies, Latinx studies, Black studies, to more comparative race and ethnic studies. So at Columbia, as in many other places, one could major in comparative race and ethnic studies, but one could also major in the experience of a certain group, like Latinx studies. And both are fine. They both contribute to understanding each other. The other issue is that by its nature, ethnic studies is multidisciplinary. We have scholars who are historians, literary experts, social scientists, etc., people in public health, people even in STEM, right? And so what we bring is a way of thinking about how disciplines connect, how we learn from each other. And I think actually this is another source of tension in the university, especially Columbia, which is very much rooted in traditional academic disciplines. And despite some of the rhetoric from the university, is not really that excited about interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary work. An example of our curriculum at CSER is that we have a course called Colonization and Decolonization in the Making of the Modern World. I always tell students it's a corrective to the core, to CC. The core has undergone a lot of criticism in the last 20 years, even for being very Eurocentric. And the curriculum has changed only very slightly, kind of around the edges. It still remains a very Eurocentric curriculum. And a lot of students are upset about that. They want something that's broader, that's global, that tells really what European colonialism had to do with the making of our world today. And so this is one of the most popular classes at CSER. It's required for our majors. Sometimes we run as many as 4 sections a year, and we still have long waiting lists. So students really hunger for this kind of education. The other thing about ethnic studies is related to the content. It's about who are the people involved. The students, as well as the faculty, often themselves or ourselves come from a marginalized community. It's a project of recognition, of representation. Sometimes this is castigated by opponents as being merely identity politics. Right now, everything is identity politics. But what I think is important here, it is not just about people feeling good about ourselves, but it's about the importance of our own histories and experiences to the university as a community and our representation in the university. So there's ongoing organizing, ongoing struggle to develop ethnic studies. As you can see, these are Spectator articles from over the years. And in 2007, our students had another hunger strike demanding a department, also demanding more faculty. And we did get a promise to hire more faculty, but it was never enough. And I want to say that you may not understand, our viewers may not understand the difference between a center and a department. In the Columbia infrastructure, a center is the lowest form of unit. It's the lowest. Then you have institutes, and then you have departments, full academic departments. As a center, we cannot hire our own faculty. All of our faculty who have lines in CSER have to share those positions with traditional departments. The traditional departments do the hiring. They are responsible for the tenure. So we really have suboptimal input into who we hire and who works for us. A department has the authority to hire and tenure its own faculty. This is super important because right now in ethnic studies, we have, I don't know, 50 to 80 majors and concentrators every year. We have more majors than some full-fledged departments, that is for sure. And we have maybe 8 to 10 full-time equivalent faculty. We have, most of them are quarter-line appointments or half-time appointments. More than half of our courses are taught by adjuncts. This is not a way to offer a quality education. So this is an ongoing struggle. And what I want to share with you now is where we are today. 3 years ago, CSER underwent its academic review. This is a regular review by the administration that all units have to go through, departments, institutes, and centers. We had our academic review. And what was really interesting was that in the report of the academic review committee, it stated both from the internal committee and the external reviewers that CSER should be a department. They said we function like a department with the teaching, programming, and scholarship of our faculty and members. And I'm going to say this is a direct quote. There is no institutional or intellectual justification for CSER not being a full academic department. And they compared us to the recently formed African American and African Diasporic Studies Department. So our faculty discussed this. We said, yes, we want to move forward and become a department. And we spent the next year developing a proposal. It was a year-long process. We had focus groups, we did research, we started drafting a proposal, and that process, as of today, is totally stalled. The administration does not support the departmentalization of CSER. That is, all of its actions point to that. They do not support us becoming a department. There's been some wishy-washy lip service to becoming a department, but proposals that have been drafted are stalled in the Office of the Executive Vice President of Arts and Sciences. And what's worse is that the Arts and Sciences has, I believe, undermined CSER. CSER has not had a director, a faculty director, since Carl Jacoby and I stepped down at the end of our four-year term. For the last 2 years, this year and the year before, CSER is under interim directors, right now not even a member of the faculty. So why does CSER not have a faculty director? What is happening with the departmentalization process? These are questions to which, sadly, we don't have answers. This is a senior project done at CSER by Audrey O, class of 2021 of Columbia College. And this is a beautiful, beautiful website, and you can go to it. You can look at it on Instagram, I believe. And I think what she stresses is how the struggle for ethnic studies is an ongoing process. It's an ongoing struggle. It is motivated and driven by students as well as faculty. And so she recognizes in her thesis the origins of CSER in its protests by students, in civil disobedience, in the hunger strike, and how this is unparalleled in Colombia's history. And she promises at the end that a center that was built on the foundations of disruption will continue to disrupt. So right now, I think CSER is at a crossroads, but I think as Audrey has shown, as our students in the past have shown, as Marcel's recounting of the 1996 struggle and even those before have shown, we will not stop. The students will not stop. And we will have a department for the study of ethnicity and race at Columbia. When, we can't say, but I know it will happen in the future. So thank you. So I'm going to hand it back to Joanne.
Professor Ngai, Professor Agüeros, thank you so much for those presentations. It really, just to say again, if people have questions, please put them in the Q&A. I have a few because that was a walk down memory lane, and also it's got my activist juices coming back up. I wanted to ask for both of you, but maybe Marcel first. You know, like what lessons should we take away from 1996 and these moments in time, 1996, 2007, these moments of protest on campus and civil disobedience? Like, do you view the protests as successful, not successful, somewhere in between? It also it seems, and I think that's why we wanted to do the discussion today, which is that we're able to look at a movement that happened 80 years ago, and follow it over 30 years. When you were hunger striking as a senior, could you have imagined that we would have gotten to this spot? Did you expect to go farther? If you could just kind of give us some of your thoughts about that, looking back 30 years.
Yes, I would love to. So I apologize, but somehow my video is stuck here in the process of having it turned off and on. So I'll try to figure that out after I answer your question, but I'm gonna talk in the dark here. So those are really difficult questions you're asking me. So were the protests a success? I would say yes. I think if you talk to anybody who was involved at the time, many would say that it was transformative experience. It shaped the way they thought about the world around them. It certainly was for me. The lessons that I learned from that period of time were there are too many to try and enumerate today. But I also think that from a practical standpoint, we did get the university to live up to promises that it had made a generation before. So you could say, well, it was maybe too late in coming, but it was better than not having that happen at all. And the other comment I would just make on that topic is that if you ever have the good fortune of being invited to the CSER senior thesis presentation, so you saw an example of a CSER thesis, they're unbelievable. The range of scholarship, the creativity, the social engagement of the students is mind-blowing, and it is in dimensions that those of us who were involved in the 90s could have never imagined. And that's a success. I mean, that's the whole point, is that we wanted to open a window for a kind of intellectual engagement that didn't exist. I mean, it was piecemeal and it was bubbling in various places, but it was really not centralized, and CSER has allowed that. Now, is that sufficient? No. And we knew in the 90s that it wasn't going to be sufficient to have a center that didn't have autonomous hiring for all the reasons that Mae gave. You need to be able to hire your own faculty. I would add that one other aspect of this that Mae didn't mention was you need to be able to have your own graduate students. Ph.D. research is a central part of the engagement. So the story is definitely not finished. Okay, now what was the other part of that? So sorry, that was a long answer to your first part. The being able to look back at it, I think it's very odd for me now to sit on the other side of this in this institution, to be part of the oppressive structure, so to speak, right? And to see from that perspective what this is like. I tend to be an optimist, and so I'm hopeful that eventually Columbia will do the right thing. It's not obvious to me that it's going to happen because of what Mae described in terms of the internal obstacles to that, but I do think that there are some really good reasons and some real commitments that will hopefully push us in that direction. So anyway, I'm going to stop there because I don't want to take up all your time with my answers.
Gotcha. Thank you. Mae, is there anything you wanted to add to that? Was 1996 a success, not a success, something other, or in between?
It was definitely a success. And I think it's testament to the fact that it's only through struggle that we can have victories, right? Nobody hands you anything on a platter. It's all the result of standing up for what you believe, putting your self on the line, so to speak. So it was definitely a success. And the university was forced to give us a center. And at every step, students and faculty had to force the university to expand, to give us more lines, but we are starved for resources. I think CSER is a really good example of the importance of having an institutional home for ethnic studies, to have classes, to have a major, to have a concentration, to have programming, to have public-facing work. We have an art gallery. You know, it's awesome, but we are starved for resources. You know, we have, I think in part of our self-study, we looked at our faculty to student ratio. It was like 16 to 1, or maybe it was even greater, where the college brags that their student to faculty student ratio is 6 to 1. So we are overworked. It's a work that it is an important job for faculty members because we're joint appointments with other departments. We also have responsibilities in our home departments, so we're doing double duty for the university, but we are committed to our students, and our students are committed to the program. So as they say, the struggle continues.
We have a question from Alicia Jen, who is class of 25. And May, this is maybe for you. So looking beyond our campus, what is the general state of ethnic studies today? I expect that the anti-racism protests in 2020 increased interest, but has the resulting anti-DEI backlash put things back where they started or even further back? What are your thoughts on that?
I would say that the events that happened after the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement certainly did put a spotlight on the questions of race and racism at Columbia. President Bollinger committed resources, including hiring of more faculty, to study this question, you know, as part of our remit as an educational institution. He did not mention ethnic studies. He did not mention CSER. So I think that there's a tendency to see race as a black-white phenomenon and to not understanding race or racisms, multiple racisms as part of society. So that's one thing. And there has been, you know, as student interest in ethnic studies has grown, as I said, our number of majors has gone through the roof. We can barely service all of the students. And right now we're at a point where the backlash against DEI, I think, does hurt us in terms of the administration's willingness to commit resources to CSER. I don't know why they're stalling on us becoming a department. You have to ask them. They don't talk to us, actually. But I think you know, there's always been resistance. During the 1996 hunger strike, President George Rupp, who was president of Columbia at the time, says there will never be a department, right? And that's been their tune since 1996. We'll let you have some programs, we'll let you have some classes, we'll let you have a center, we'll put you on the margin, et cetera, but you cannot be a full-fledged academic department. And that is the wall that we have been struggling to overcome all these years.
Thank you. I'm taking a look at some of the questions that have come in through the Q&A. There are a number of questions about how students are different. And you both have had kind of a front row seat to how students have changed, Marcel being one of them, and then teaching them for over the next 3 decades. I guess, you know, to combine a couple of questions, Ben Noodleman asks, should protesting be done differently today versus how it was done decades ago? And then Jonathan Friedman is also asking, do you think that today's students understand the history of activism at Columbia, and have they taken the right lessons from that history? So I guess in essence, like, how are students similar and different from 30 years ago with regards to civil disobedience and protest?
Well, we've seen in the last year or so at Columbia, the price of protests now, depending on your issue, but if your issue is not favored by the administration or by certain sections of the university, it's a very steep price. Our students then, as now, are overwhelmingly nonviolent and have absolutely the right to nonviolent protest. So I think students today are probably more aware of the stakes that are involved because we have seen not just police come and arrest people, but really brutalize our students. Right. And we've seen the result in large numbers of suspensions and even expulsions that the university has taken against student activists. In this case, of course, the students protesting the war against Gaza. So I think students today are very much aware of what's going on in the world. I think they're also, as in the past, aware of the university's own interests in, or vested interests, one might say, and a tension that exists between powerful trustee and donor interests, and the tension with that, and having a learning environment, right, where we can explore and question and debate ideas without fear of reprisal. So I think it's a much more dangerous time right now that we've seen in the last year, and students are certainly aware of it. But I think student activism goes up and down over the years. During my tenure as CSER director, we certainly saw increased student activism, and it's because students are aware of the world that we live in. They're aware of the inequalities that they face. So I think in more ways than not, they are similar to the students of 1996, although of course every generation, is unique in its own characteristics. Marcel, what do you think?
Yeah, so thanks, man. I mean, so I agree 100%. I just wanted to amplify the earlier part of your response, which is that I do think that the university response has changed significantly. It's really interesting in 68, you see these pictures in spec of the president at the time walking around and engaging with protesters. By 96, the president was really not a presence in terms of dealing with us. And in the last year, the president wasn't even in the city when decisions were made about how to handle the protests. So you see definitely that happening. And more broadly, I think you see a sort of criminalization of protests, not just at Columbia, but across the country, more or less since 9/11, when the security apparatus became a bigger part of our day-to-day lives across the board. And so I do think that the ways in which we treat student protests have changed significantly. I don't think that there's the students today obviously operate in a different kind of world than we did 30 years ago, than the students 100 years ago, and so on. But fundamentally, Columbia continues to attract very smart, very engaged, very activist students in waves, right? There are times when more so and less so, who are I think dedicated to certain kinds of change. And I don't anticipate that changing, although I suspect that the institution is trying to change that going forward.
And I guess just to add to that, social media didn't exist 30 years ago, right? So everything is amplified due to new technology. Marcel, I did have a question. Looking back, for me, like one of the greatest gifts, as you mentioned, was this real solidarity between students of different races and ethnicities. And sometimes on college campuses, those communities are segregated, sometimes by just social groups. And that was really such a gift. And that lesson did stay for me for the 30 years after. Do you feel like, I know that you had a similar experience that you mentioned. Do you feel like that is still possible, still exists today for our students? Because I really did remember it as quite positive.
Yeah, well, good. I'm glad that you do. Yeah, I mean, think it's still possible. I mean, I will say that 30 years ago, that was a lot of work and it wasn't easy and it didn't always go well. But yes, I'm optimistic about that. And I think if you look at certainly the student protests about the war that we've had over the last year, they have reached across in similar ways. Maybe obviously again different issues, different times, but those, I think when there are when organizing is done well, it recognizes that in order to be successful, you can't just lean on one group of people. And I mean, Mae is the labor organizer, so we should definitely orient these questions to her. But I think in building solidarity means educating people about how issues affect them all and how they're not just narrowly confined to one group. And there is no way that discussion around ethnic studies is going to lead to a department at Columbia without the buy-in of majority, white men, let's say, just to pick one group, right? It's just not going to happen. It's going to require that kind of work. And so ultimately, if you really want something to be successful, you have to be willing to put in that effort.
A couple questions are coming in about how alumni can help. I think they're interested in how CSER can get departmental status. Jan Kalicki from class of 68, how can we alumni help you get departmental status? Josh Johnson, CSER 2013, hello. How can alumni engage in longitudinal support in efforts to establish a department? How can alumni help? There's also a question, I'll ask this later, but how can alumni help?
Well, a couple of years ago, while we were preparing our proposal for departmentalization at CSER, and we met with Joanne actually that year, and we met with other people from the Columbia Alumni Association who were very supportive. And I think that I'm gonna refer you guys, you alum, to Joanne, because as well, or you can contact the associate director of CSER, Mae Ngai. You can look her up at CSER. You can just give her your name, and as we proceed down the line to ramp up things again, we'll put you on a list to contact you. I mean, of course, you can always write to Amy Hungerford, the executive vice president, and tell her what you think and what you want. But in terms of a more organized effort, I think when we were preparing for a campaign around departmentalization, we definitely had our alumni in mind. In fact, one of the events that was held that was sponsored by the students at CSER was a program featuring alumni who were active in '96 and since then. So, we are in touch with alumni and we really welcome your support. And I think it really does make a difference to show that Columbia alum are behind this. Thank you.
Another question, and this is just my own curiosity. The West Coast has always been ahead of the rest of the nation in terms of understanding, or you can fight me on this, in terms of understanding and supporting ethnic studies, Latino studies, or Latinx studies, Asian American studies. Do you feel like the East Coast or the rest of the country has caught up, or and if they haven't, why not?
Well, the West Coast did lead nationally in terms of ethnic studies programs. On the East Coast in the early 1970s, there were only a few schools on the East Coast that had programs. So I think this was a product of student activism and also the civil rights movement. And the fact that the University of California is a public institution, right? Elite schools like Berkeley and UCLA, they're public institutions. I was visiting UCLA a couple weeks ago, and they have now, they've had for many years separate departments, like a Department of Asian American Studies, a Department of Chicano and Latinx Studies, a Department of Black Studies. They had these separate departments. Now they are combined under an umbrella kind of formation with a vice provost in charge of them all. They just received the Asian American, a wealthy Asian American donor just gave 10 million to Asian American Studies. And the Asian American Studies asked him if he would give it to all the groups. So that was an act of solidarity where the Asian American Studies said, okay, 10 million, we can share this and we can build all of our programs together. I think the trend that you see in the West Coast is towards this combination of departments and programs that were discrete in terms of different ethnic and racial groups now coming together in a kind of institutional formation. What you see on the East Coast is interesting. In many places, schools have skipped the stage of separate departments and have established programs and departments on race and ethnic studies. The University of Chicago just established a department for the study of race, diasporas, and indigeneity, which is a way of highlighting the key concepts in ethnic studies. Tufts University has a separate department as well in ethnic studies. Yale University has their race, ethnicity, and migration program, which is part of American Studies, is for all intents and purposes a department because they have their own hiring lines, right? And they have their own PhD students. So the trend is towards these more comparative programs where intellectually the key concepts are at the center. But at the same time, we have kind of sub majors or subtopics or sub themes that focus on particular groups. And I think this really is the way of the future.
And post 2020, there was great interest in establishing ethnic studies curricula or in various K through 12
Yes.
types of schools. What do you see recently, I guess, regarding that trend? Is it still going, or was that really, post 2020?
Well, some states have laws or legislated mandates to teach race and ethnic studies in K-12. Some of them are unfunded mandates, but some of them are funded. California is probably the leader in this regard in terms of requiring K-12 and the entire, I think it's Cal State University system, that everybody has to take an ethnic studies class. So I think this is the way of the future. People need to know more about the world around them, the world that we live in, and all its diversity, in all of its contradictions, in all of its histories. To be a well-educated person, this is what you need to know. So California obviously has a very large population of non-Hispanic whites. No, they have a large population of people who are not whites, right? It's not quite a majority minority state, but it's very close to having. So as I said again, the legislature and these public universities respond to public pressure. In the East Coast, we have increasing diversity in our populations. I think CUNY is a good example. CUNY is just starting a new graduate program in race and ethnic studies, a PhD program, right? They're way ahead of Columbia, right? Because they're a public university. And so I think that with a private institution like Columbia, there are many benefits, obviously, but what we lack is any kind of accountability to the public. And I think that we see that difference in how these issues play out.
John, can I just jump in really quickly because I know we're
Sure.
but there is a question that people have been asking about the last time a new department was formed, and it's very recent history. It's around African American studies.
Right.
So African American studies came to Columbia as an institute, as Mae was saying, the middle rung in the hierarchy, in 1994 with Manning Marable to lead it. And it was about, I don't know, 3-4 years ago now, maybe a bit more, that it transitioned into being a department. And that to me was a full circle moment. I was in the, as Mae was as well, in the faculty meeting of the arts and sciences where we voted for that. And I expected that to be somewhat contentious, and it was not at all. It flew through the arts and sciences. In fact, many of the faculty expressed amazement that we didn't already have an African American Studies department. To which, which was really bizarre because many of them had been there since the 90s and knew exactly why we didn't have a department.
Yeah.
But, there you go.
What
I
year
will
was that?
say
What year was that?
that was like maybe 4 years ago.
Wow.
I will say this about Columbia. It's a great institution. I got my Ph.D. here. It's a great institution of learning. It is last in everything. Last Ivy League college to admit women. Last Ivy League institution to have African American Studies as a department. Still don't have an ethnic studies department. So Columbia seems to lag behind. It's like even when everybody else is doing it, they have to be embarrassed or ashamed into doing it. So I think that this is, I don't know why that is. I don't know why Columbia is in so many ways a very conservative institution. But I think it changes when students and faculty organize and can make that change. And as I said before, our academic review said, and this was a review done by peers and the faculty, both in Columbia and outside of Columbia, pointing to the formation of Black Studies as a department, said there is no intellectual or institutional justification for CSER to not be a department. So there it is. I hope people in the arts and sciences are listening to this and be reminded of our demands to be a full department.
Well, thank you to you both. In the spirit of positive change, I think it is these types of conversations that really for our alumni and our faculty to be together to talk about these issues that that affect us as an institution. So I really appreciate both of your time, and I hope that this conversation continues. And it certainly seems that our long radical protest tradition is it's it's just another moment in it, but as Mae pointed out, there's some conservatism too, that it's that push and pull. I think that affects us as a community and as an institution. So thank you to both Professor Agüeros and Professor Ngai for joining us. I wish we could have gotten to more questions. If you like this type of programming, please join us for the third installment of our series on civil disobedience. It is scheduled for Wednesday, October 30th from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Time with Professor Robert Neer, who will lead us in a discussion with breakout rooms on the intellectual foundations of civil disobedience, featuring selected texts by Martin Luther King Jr. And keep an eye out for announcements regarding our spring theme. We're tentatively thinking that it might be on wellness, which is something on all of our minds. If you have ideas for speakers, future topics, or feedback on this program, please shoot a note to ccalumni@columbia.edu. Thank you so much for spending time with us today, and see you next on October 30th. Thank you, Mae and Marcel.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, CCAA.